supporting speaker and have known him for 11 years, having first met him at an AmeriCal Division Veterans Association reunion. David Taylor is a retired colonel, Special Forces, U.S. Army Reserve. He served 4 years on active duty, including combat in the Vietnam War, where he was wounded twice, and 22 years in the Army Reserve in Special Operations and Counterterrorism. He is Airborne, Ranger, and Special Forces qualified. Colonel Taylor is retired from the business world, where he worked in business management in the plastics industry for 29 years, including international operations, marketing, and new business development. He is an author, historian, and publisher, specializing in military history. His book about his infantry battalion in the Vietnam War was published in 2011 and is now in its third printing, and his articles about war have been published in national magazines. Colonel Taylor and his wife Susan, a former Army nurse, are residents of Medina, Ohio. It is my privilege to introduce you to my friend, David Taylor.
Every day that you wake up free, it's going to be a good day. And where does that freedom come from? Well, the answer is on the names of the fallen on the Vietnam Wall, who gave their all, and the veterans standing in front of me and around me. Our veterans have kept us free in the Cold War and armed conflicts to ensure the blessings of freedom for us all. Our freedom to fail, our freedom to succeed, and our freedom to try came from millions of ordinary citizens who saw it as their duty to serve and not to be served. We gather here today to remember those who fell in the Vietnam War, those who went before us, before their time, so that we may be free. Here on this special ground, we gather with family members, friends, and comrades of those whose name are eternally etched on the wall to pay homage and give respect. Many citizens passing by on nearby Interstate 75 are not aware that we gather here, or what we will say, or what we will feel here. They are busy living their lives, working, shopping, and attending to life's busy details. And that's okay. After all, why do soldiers make the sacrifices they make? It's not so that our citizens can live in peace. And yet for us here, this is an intensely personal time. And you'll have to pardon if each one of us, some of us, particularly the veterans, don't seem to be quite all here. If our minds aren't wandering, our eyes searching the sky, for chances are we are searching the corners of our minds for past comrades, distant places, and certain events. We have done so each day since returning from Vietnam, being reminded of that war in a sight, a smell, or a sound. And as I look around at my fellow veterans sitting here, I first want to remember you. And I would suggest to you that as you try to manage your emotions while you're by the wall, that you look in a mirror and respect who you see and try to understand what you feel. For this day, as in every day of every year, in towns and cities across our land, in churches, schools, and stadiums, our fellow Americans remember you when they sing, "My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing." And we remember. I served in Vietnam in 1969. Most of my heroes in life are on that wall. I was wounded several times, shot twice, hit in the head, neck, and ear with shrapnel, and I had a bout of malaria. And when I returned to the United States to an Army hospital to recover from my wounds, I was often asked a question by my family and friends. How did we persevere? Persevere in the jungles day in and day out, not knowing when one step or the next might hit a mine or a booby trap, or a sniper's bullet might hit its mark. To continue on without much support or understanding from some of our countrymen, because the objective and outcome of that war was uncertain. In answer to that question that I was asked, some have said that, well, we serve with a professional spirit. But young men of 18 and 19 are professional at nothing. Certainly not at managing the meeting of life with death, as many had to do. And so the question remained, what made us persevere in Vietnam day in and day out to go far beyond the ordinary requirements ordained by the wearing of the uniform? The answer to that question, it seems to me, has to do with whatever it is that keeps America unstuck. It has to do with our schools and teachers who challenge us and teach us and help to guide us in our early years. The answer has to do with our scout groups, our Boy Scouts, Cub Scouts, Girl Scouts, Brownies, campfire organizations, and all the rest. Organizations that profess a code of ethics or beliefs, be it the Scout Oath or Promise, that stress honor and dignity and self-control. And that the alternatives our children may see from outside those organizations of doing things simply because they feel good are nothing but alternatives to self-destruction. The answer to that question has to do with our sports organizations and our coaches who stress the need to work together and work hard as a team, with each one of us playing our position and pulling our own load. And while this alone will never guarantee a win for the parents, without it, you students will never get to first base in life. The answer to that question I faced so long ago has to do with our ministers, pastors, priests, and rabbis who constantly remind us there is a God, who constantly who is someone who is there to turn to in times of stress and turmoil, be it the stress of combat or the turmoil of everyday life. The reminder that prayer helps to sustain us in good times as well as bad, if we look to a power greater than ourselves. And we remember. I volunteered to go to Vietnam, and I am proud to have served. As I prepared these remarks last week, my mind wandered, as they always do when I get close to these occasions. And I remembered the story of an Air Force pilot, a young lieutenant by the name of Sullivan, who took an 85mm rocket fired by the communists right into the cockpit of his F-105 fighter while he was flying over the capital city of the enemy, Hanoi. He was wounded so badly in the cockpit he could not eject and parachute away. And as his plane was rapidly descending to the earth, to what he knew was his certain death, he made one last radio transmission to his comrades flying above him. He said, it looks like I bought the schnitz, fellas. I'll see you later. I remember the story of a young rifleman by the name of Milton Olive, a young black boy from the streets of Chicago, who during a firefight in the jungles of Vietnam, threw himself on top of an enemy hand grenade to save the lives of his buddies around him, both black and white. I remember Harry Italiano, one of my machine gunners, and Mitchell Sandman, his assistant gunner. They're right on the wall. As we descended to the ground on a combat air assault, I jumped out the right side of the helicopter and lived. They happened to jump out the left side and were cut down by enemy fire. I remember my platoon sergeant, Staff Sergeant Green, a black non-commissioned officer dedicated to the Army and a career he fully loved. And while I was in the hospital with malaria, he stepped on a mine and lost both legs above the knees, and later in life died of kidney failure as a result of those wounds. I remember Gregory Scherf, one of my squad leaders, a good-looking young man. He only had a few weeks to go in Vietnam and in the Army. And he once told me that he was already accepted by a college back home in Denver. And his high school girlfriend was also accepted at the same college. And she was waiting for him. And that they were going to enter college, go through college together. And on the day that they were to be graduated, they would also be married. And yet one day, with my patrol surrounded by the enemy, a hole in my left side from an enemy bullet, my lower right leg shattered by another enemy bullet. This young man crawled through enemy fire to my position to bandage my leg. And then in the true tradition of the American soldier, he sought to reassure me, his leader, that everything was going to be all right and that he was going to get us out of that mess. And at that moment, he was struck in the head by an enemy bullet, slowly lowered his head to my feet, and died. No greater love hath any man than to give his life for another. On a day like today, with the wall before us, we need to remember that all these deaths from Vietnam and all of our wars should be looked upon as payments on a bill, a continuous bill known as freedom. And it is a bill that will never be paid in full. And although we may question at times why the payment was made, or perhaps the payment was too high, or perhaps, just perhaps, it was made in the wrong place, that will never ever diminish the level of individual sacrifice given. It has always been the same. It is never less. And students, you see that that payment continues to be made today to secure your freedom, this time in the war on global terrorism. The world has changed since you began your school careers, and it will continue to change. There is doubt and anxiety in our country. We still have a culture that places too much emphasis on celebrities, those who appear in the movies, on television and social media, and only an occasional note, when danger is near, on our true heroes, such as those who are fighting on the front lines of freedom, and those who have fought and died for our country. Students, it's important that you do not confuse the celebrity from the hero. Heroes are distinguished by achievement, but the celebrity is marked by image. The hero created himself or herself, but the movies, TV, and newspapers, and the web create the celebrity. The hero becomes a big person in our eyes. The celebrity, nothing but a big name. Their status depends on the attention that we give them, and they like it that way. Today's special occasion by the Vietnam War is a good time to return to fundamental values. John Adams, our second president, once observed, there should be two educations. One should teach us how to make a living, and the other, how to live. When we treat each other at school with respect, when we remember that our freedom to be at school came from the sacrifices of veterans, when we remember to make good choices, and when those choices include good moral values, we are reminding ourselves how to live. You students have been going to school for many years to learn how to make a living, how to read, how to understand what you read, how to make calculations, and all the rest. And I suppose many people, your parents, your relatives, if they were asked what your schooling is all about, they would say it's all about information. Lots of it. And you have to go through all of that information, understand what is important, and hopefully remember that on a test. But you students and I know that answer is not entirely correct. Your schooling is not only about information, It is also about identity. It's about whom people say you are, who you say you are, and who you want to be. Today, on this special occasion by the Vietnam Wall, at the beginning of a new school year, it is a good time to remember to pattern yourselves after heroes, not celebrities. To be yourselves in the face of decisions that you have to make every day. To choose right over wrong, truth over convenience, and honesty over popularity. As you continue your studies in school to learn how to make a living, always remember to learn how to live. In school, as you try to make good choices on your tests, remember to make good choices in your behavior. As you continue to process and evaluate all of that information in school, continue to process and evaluate your character. As you enlarge your mind, enlarge your spirit. And to you, my fellow veterans, how can we possibly honor our comrades on the Vietnam Wall? Is it possible to do anything that will ever match their sacrifice? Abraham Lincoln hinted at a possible answer to that question when at Gettysburg in November of 1864 he said, "We cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men living and dead who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. It is us for the living, rather, to be dedicated to the unfinished work for which they gave their last full measure of devotion." What each of us here needs to do, it seems to me, is look into our hearts and souls and ask ourselves, what are we doing with the blood-stained legacy of our comrades that we left behind in war? Their true memorial will be the future direction and culture of this nation that we continue to form from the sacrifices and the services of our veterans killed in war. And so to you students, veterans, and fellow citizens gathered here, the best gift we can give to those who gave their all, whose names are embraced on this wall, is for each one of us, each and every day, to continue to help make human life more human. Thank you all for inviting me here to Sidney, Ohio, America's hometown, and may God bless you all. Now, Ms. Filippo will have some administrative announcements.